We're talking today with Alvena Franzen of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now, can you start us off with some background? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Salamanca, New York, on February the 2nd, 1919.
Okay, now, and what part of New York is that in?
That's down in the southwestern part of the state of New York, south of Buffalo.
Okay, and did you grow up there?
Yes, well, yes, I did. My parents lived in Buffalo, New York for a little while, but most of the time we spent in Salamanca.
Okay, and what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My father was superintendent of public works of the city that I grew up in, and he also, up to that time, had worked on what was the BR&P Railroad, which came to B&O.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and was he able to keep his job or have steady work in the 30s?
Yes.
Okay.
That was getting kind of rough, so, yeah, that depression was not the easiest thing to cope with.
Mm-hmm.
But
And how did that affect you? Was his pay cut or his hours cut or just hard to get things?
I learned how to get along with that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a necessity.
Yeah.
And when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go to college. I was interested in becoming a doctor, but there was no money for college, so I became a registered nurse.
Okay. Now, what kind of training program was there for nurses at that time?
I went to Bradford, Pennsylvania, to school of nursing there. It was a diploma program, and I felt that I got the best education I could have gotten anywhere because it has rewarded me many times over in the years that have followed.
Okay. And how many years of studying was that? Was that a 2-year program?
It was 3 years.
Okay.
Not like the college of today, 2 years of college and 2 years of nursing.
Mm-hmm.
This was 3 years, and it was all integrated, so that your experiences really were very valuable.
So you integrated. So were you working in a hospital as well as taking classes, or?
Well, I was at the hospital, Bradford Hospital,
Yeah.
and after I graduated, I stayed there for a while, and then I went back to my hometown and worked at that city hospital.
Okay. Now, how did you pay for the nursing school?
Well, in those days, my parents paid for it.
Okay. So, but that was less expensive than college would have been?
Well,
Or just shorter?
Much cheaper than college would have been. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And was part of it that you were doing some work for the hospital while you were training?
Well, I imagine you'd say that because we took care of patients.
Yeah. Okay.
We began after we began even in the first 6 months, we started some.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's really on-the-job training.
Right.
All right. And then you said you went back to Salamanca. So when did you go back to Salamanca?
I went back about a year after I graduated. I graduated in 41.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back. I stayed in Pennsylvania for almost half a year. Then I went home to work. But when I was a student, I came off night duty and turned on my radio, and you know what I heard? I'm being asked here, where were you on Pearl Harbor
Mm-hmm.
Day? And my director of nurses told us that patriotic nurses belong to the American Red Cross Nursing Service.
Mm-hmm.
Being patriotic, I joined, and that was nice for a while. But then one day I got a letter in the mail and it said, which do you prefer, the Army Nurse Corps or the Navy? And I like dry land, so I took the Army.
All right. Now that wouldn't have been an actual draft notice, though.
Well, they were talking about drafting nurses at that time. And I had a brother that was in service, and I thought, the least anybody could do would be to help. But I didn't exactly ask to go.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
the fact that I belonged to the Red Cross Nursing Service did it.
Right. Okay. So now, well, when you were with the Red Cross Nursing Service, what were you doing?
That's when I did the Army.
Right. Oh, so you joined the Red Cross Nursing Service, and then they said, okay,
Yep,
if you do that, then you're in the Army.
that's right.
Okay. Okay. Now, and then where did you have to report to for duty?
Fort Niagara. I was sworn in at Fort Niagara.
All right. Now, when people think of Fort Niagara today, they think of the old 18th century French fort. Was there an army base there too?
It was an army station when we were there. Mhm.
Okay. All right. So, now, did you just go there for processing?
It was more or less for orientation.
Yeah.
And to acquire clothing and things, and just to be observed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when did you arrive there?
The 1st of May in 2000,
Or,
2000, no.
well,
1940.
43. There we go. Okay. And then, so you're there, and then where do they send you for training?
To Pine Camp, Camp Drum later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we had the opportunity to be just like the GI. We called infiltration courses under fire. We climbed up and down rope ladders, which came in handy when I went to France.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned how to fire carbines and pistols. We learned how to read maps. Any, things that would be quite essential if we were taken overseas, and we were.
Right. Now, when you were doing this training, were all of you nurses, or were there some WACs or other women there?
No, we were all nurses.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And about how old do you think the other nurses were?
I was when I got out of nursing training, I was about 22, but I was 24 when I was in service.
Mm-hmm. And were you older or younger than the other nurses, or about the same?
About the same.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And when you were doing that training, did they put a lot of emphasis on Army discipline and following orders and that kind of thing?
They really did. It was kind of different, but having been in nurses training, and I learned a lot about regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just shifting from one place to another, really.
Right. And how did you do with the physical training?
I did okay.
All right. And were there some women who had trouble with that, with the obstacle courses and those things?
I think there were some that had problems. Kind of going down a filtration, down with a live ammunition going over our heads. They told us to keep our heads down. Well, the hammocks are so heavy you couldn't pick them up anyway. And that was kind of a scary experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how long did you spend there?
We were there for about a year, not quite a year. Went into 43, we went out, I went overseas in 44.
Okay.
Right after,
Well, didn't you go to Fort Devens for a while first?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I guess you did the basic training at what later became Fort Drum. That's in New York.
Right.
And then did you go from there? What was the next stop?
From Camp Town, went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Right. Okay. And how long did you spend there?
Not a year, it was just a short period of time.
Right.
Because we were over in England at the time that France was invaded by.
Right. So, and do you remember roughly when you went to England?
It was in the spring, it was in March.
Okay, 44?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And where did you sail out from?
New York, we could buy the Statue of Liberty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what kind of ship were you on?
It was the Aquitania. It was a sister ship of the Lusitania that was sunk by the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no convoy. And, equinoctial storms and zigzagging to stay away from submarine. That was quite a trip.
Okay. Now, did you get seasick?
We all did.
Okay.
And we only got 2 meals a day, and they fed us soup for breakfast, and you sit there and watch, the waves. And after it went up and down a few times, it was enough. I had to get up and leave. I couldn't stay.
Okay.
I was too sick.
Now, I suppose most of the passengers on the ship would have been male soldiers, right?
It was everybody. It was outfits.
Yeah.
Outfits. And staterooms that were meant for 2 people maybe, well, they had bunk beds, 3 levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had lots of company.
Okay. But did they keep the women separate most of the time from everybody
We were
else?
separate.
Yeah. All right. So you just had contact with a few of the crew and not very much else?
Right.
Okay. And about how long did the trip take?
It took about 7 days, I think. It was so slow motion.
Yeah.
Doing this too much.
Yeah, but it was still faster than a regular convoy would be,
Yeah.
because even a fast convoy was 10
Well, that
days.
was kind of frightening, you know, to think we were out there all by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If they sunk us, we're out there all by ourselves.
Right. I don't know. Did you have any U-boat scares, or did you not know that?
No, when we got to Scotland, we went in a river and they had nets across the river. And we had to sit there on the ship until they lifted the net, and quickly we got through, they put the net back down again.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, well, we're glad that happened. We were thankful we got to Scotland.
Yeah. Okay. And where did you land in Scotland?
Glasgow.
Okay. And did they just move you right out of there, or did you stay for a while?
We stayed there just overnight, and then they took us out and sent us down into Wales
Okay. And how did you get there?
on a train.
Okay. And what was the train ride like?
No, about the usual.
Well, do they have the European-style trains with the compartments and that kind of
No.
thing? Just like a regular American train?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. And you get down to Wales, and then where were you in Wales?
In Wales, we were billeted in homes,
Mm-hmm.
and we just did some routine work. We didn't work in a hospital at all. We just did things that were set up for us to do by the outfit. And
Okay. And what unit were you with at this time?
that was about same. Well, it was the same year that I got overseas.
No. No. What unit were you serving in? What was the hospital?
62nd.
62nd General Hospital?
Mhm.
Okay. And do you have an idea of about how many personnel were in the hospital?
There were, I think, 60 nurses.
And how many doctors?
That I don't remember.
Okay. And what was a general hospital supposed to do?
Well, it was supposed to take, like the general hospitals in this country do, but this was a different circumstances. And so we, like I said before, we did evacuation work. We would get patients come in, and maybe they'd stay for a day, and maybe they'd go right out. And sometimes if they were injured enough and they had to be given some treatment, they'd stay a little longer. But we had about a 90% turnover every 48 hours.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, at the time you arrived, though, you didn't have much business yet,
No,
because they hadn't invaded Normandy yet.
that we weren't getting any wounded from Europe because the invasion hadn't started yet.
Right. And your hospital, they wouldn't send any up from Italy or something like that?
No.
Okay. Now, did you move on to another place? You start out in Wales.
We moved in England down to a town called Cheltenham.
Mm-hmm.
It was down on the coast of England. And while we were down there, we went through exercises and, you know, getting our clothing together and getting ready to go across the channel.
Okay.
That was the end of my dry land again.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you didn't really set up the full hospital there?
No.
You were just waiting?
We worked in there was a hospital we worked a little bit in, but not for a very long period of time.
Right. And you didn't set up your own hospital?
No.
You used somebody else's? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Now, while you were in England waiting, did you get to go into London?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We had chances to go into little towns, and the people were quite happy to have us because I guess they thought we were going to save them.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them would invite you to come to their home, and that was nice. I went one time with some nurses, and when I left, the lady said, "I'll come again and bring some GIs." So I went back. So, you know, that was not the proper thing to do, but nonetheless, they went along with me.
Okay. So did you bring along men who were medics or orderlies from your unit, or?
They were fellows from my unit,
Yeah.
corpsmen.
Corpsmen, yeah. Okay. And did you get into London?
No, not then. I've been back to England
Yeah.
since that night.
Yeah, but then you didn't go, okay. And do you have an idea about how long you spent in Cheltenham?
Not very long. It was just a relatively short period of time because they were building up the forces then with Eisenhower to go across.
Right, okay. And then, what do you remember about D-Day and what was going on your side?
Well, we remember seeing all those airplanes going over in formation, and then we watched them come back, and not in formation. We knew it would happen. Yeah, it was a kind of a upsetting time to realize that this was real serious business. And we didn't know what was going on the other side, but we found out before too long.
Okay. Now, when did you actually go into France?
Well, they were fighting between Carentan and St. Lo when we landed on the coast. And we went in a Dutch ship. Went in as far as we could go, and you'd see all these mastheads of ships that had been sunk standing up. And we got off, went down the first nice slope ladder into a landing craft, just like the GIs. I watched them on TV in those stories. And they took us in as far as we could go, and then we got off the end of that LCI and walked across, and we sat down in front of big German gun emplacements.
Okay. Now, did you land on Omaha Beach or on Utah Beach?
Utah.
Okay. So you go in on Utah, and then did they load you up in trucks and take you somewhere, or did they march you somewhere?
And we sat out there all day, and then we got in trucks, and they took us away from there. As we progressed, we went down through St. Lo and Carentan, and those towns are really something a wreck. They look like tornadoes going through here.
Okay. Do you know how long after D-Day it was that you landed?
Probably, maybe it might have been close to a month, maybe
Okay.
not that long.
All right. Do you know if it was, because in late June, there was a big storm that wrecked the American harbor in front of Omaha. And so was that not working when you got there?
No, when we got there, it was working. I
Okay.
remember.
Okay, of course, that was Omaha and you were on Utah, so.
I went to Utah.
You went to Utah, so you might not have seen that. So, but still, because it's probably late June, but we can look that up somewhere.
Yeah, could
Okay.
be, yeah.
All right. And now, when you set up the hospital for the first time, what kind of facilities did you have?
Well, I should tell you this, we got on a train finally and left up near the coast and started running down, and we'd go and look out a window, and there'd be a big crater, and then you look down, and here was a tank sitting in a crater. They rebuilt the tracks over that. We saw a lot of that. And we stopped in one little town, and the French people were out there waving the flag, American flag no less, and offering us all kinds of things, and so we learned a little bit of French. And that was a pleasant experience, You
Okay.
think we were welcome.
All right. Well, how long after you landed did you start working with casualties?
Quite a while, because along the way we stopped at a Standard Oil chateau, and we cleaned the place all up nice, found a lot of pictures of Hitler, and we destroyed them. And they had landmines, and we had to watch when we went outdoors so we didn't trip on those, because they did a good job of hiding them. And we were there on the Labor Day. I remember that because I wrote to my parents and said all I did today was labor. The day was properly named.
Okay. Now, so they didn't bring in engineers to take out the mines?
No, one of the fellows did trip over, but he tripped it far enough away so he didn't, it didn't hurt him badly. But you always you didn't want to go for a long walk because you didn't know what you were going to get into.
Okay. So basically, so you're saying that you spent a fair amount of time in France without doing any medical work?
Well, just at the beginning we did. We were out in a cow pasture for a while.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was asking. So you just had to live in tents and,
You know, after we left the coast and got in a little ways, we lived in tents.
mm-hmm,
And we sat outdoors and ate our food sitting on the metal helmet. All kinds of crazy stuff.
mm-hmm. All right. But then eventually you move into the chateau and that's your first hospital, really?
Yeah, I should tell you this, one time we were sitting outside of our tent, and all of a sudden it was right at that tent, you know, it was a machine gun. And that's where the crawling infiltration courses came in handy, because we just flattened out and slid it into the tent. We didn't get up, we just laid there.
And were there really Germans out there, or?
We don't know, but we didn't feel very confident about our welfare.
Right. All right. Now, when you set up at this chateau, do you know where it was or at what town it was close to?
No, I don't remember. I remember the big building, it was a beautiful big
Mm-hmm.
chateau, but I don't remember being near any particular town.
So you're just out in the countryside.
Just, you know,
Now, was it flat farm fields or was it
was
forest?
flat here, it was flat.
Yeah, and that may have been
I
like,
don't remember seeing any mountains or hills there.
yeah. Well, there's not a lot of mountains, but there's some areas have forests and things like
Yeah.
that and some hills. But if you're flat and grain growing country or something,
This
That-
is just flat.
yeah. That's probably west of Paris, but or southwest of Paris, but okay. And then once you're set up there, do you get casualties coming through on a regular basis?
No, but, you know, we started out on a train. We were on that train for 3 days and 4 nights.
Okay. Well, if you were on a train that long, you might have been going farther east than that then.
And we were headed for Paris, and we were
Okay.
one of the most forward medical units in
Okay.
Paris after Paris was liberated.
Okay. And Paris is liberated in August.
Mhm.
And so then Labor
Right
Day.
after that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. All right. And did you get to go into Paris?
I did.
And what did you do there?
We got in a Jeep and rode into Paris. And there was a nice soldiers area there, and we went to that. And that was the first time that we'd gotten donuts. They had them on the English side, but they told us that we'd get those when we got to overcross. We never saw them again until we got to Paris.
All right. And was that from the Red Cross or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then when you went to Paris, what did you do there?
We didn't stay there very long. We just would go into the Jeep, and maybe we'd go to the soldiers unit area.
Mhm. And just look around?
Yeah, and get back in the Jeep and go back to camp.
Right. Okay. Now, is there a point then when you start to get a lot more work to do or more casualties come in?
Well, after we left the chateau, then we did go to an area where it was a county hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and we set up there. And that's where we got all these soldiers coming in. They'd come in. We had German prisoners working there,
Mm-hmm.
and they would bring in litters of the incoming, and they'd take out the outgoing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had them on both sides of the hall.
Right.
Once in a while, they got confused, and they took out somebody that just came. And we had Lister bags for water,
Mm-hmm.
and one night the GIs got so excited, and he thought this Lister bag was moving, and so he started firing. That was the end of the Lister bag.
Mm-hmm.
Fill them up with a hole. But we had, well, in England, we had all these air raids, and we had to get them go to work.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to bed at night, we'd put our clothes in order, get up. And so we did have to do the same thing when we got to France.
Okay. And then in France, I mean, were you kind of now in the northeastern part of France? And past
No.
Paris, or were you still?
It was not, we just went through Paris, and
Yeah.
we weren't too far from Paris.
Okay.
We were back at the Belgian Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very not too exciting situation.
Yeah. Because, well, there was a lot of fighting in the Northeast around Metz in the fall, and there were a lot of casualties coming from
There
there.
was, yeah, not
And
a
that,
lot.
now, there were a lot at the Hurtgen Forest, but they might have gone someplace else. I don't know if they came to you or not, but,
Yeah, I've said many times over, since I had experienced it, I wouldn't care to do it again.
mm-hmm,
But I would not have missed it,
right,
because it was quite vital that there were people to care for the sick.
right. Now, what did your duties consist of at the hospital? When casualties came in, what did you do?
I had to take care of getting them situated. And sometimes they came and went so fast that we never got a chance to change the bed.
Mm-hmm,
Just had to put them right back in somebody else's bed. And we just had tried to do the things we could to make it easier for them. We saw so many grotesque situations that it was kind of sad. It was very sad,
mm-hmm.
very disturbing.
Now, were some of them who came in, would they talk to you and, or,
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, some of them were so young. You talk about being young.
mm-hmm,
They were young. They were barely out of high school, and some of them weren't out of high school. They just came anyway. But that's,
so when the Battle of the Bulge started, how close did that get to you? Or do you not know?
too close.
Okay. I mean, could you hear sounds, or did you just get the casualties?
We got lots of casualties, but it was frightening because, you know, the German Bulge, and those Germans were really pushing,
Mm-hmm.
and you never knew whether you were going to move again or what was going to happen to you. But,
Yeah. Did you have a plan in place if they got too close?
well, the soldiers came first,
Mhm.
the casualties did.
Yeah. You get them out and then the rest of you.
Right.
Okay. Now, when you got into January and the Germans are getting pushed back, did you still get a lot of casualties coming in then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah. And our evacuation work continued the whole time I was there.
Mhm.
You know, 'cause there was always fighting.
yeah, 'cause it just kept going after the Bulge and we kept
See,
attacking.
company aid stations got some of them, and
Mhm.
they just passed them up in quotes
Right.
as much as they could, and then just shipped them right back out to us.
Okay. So were you sort of the next stop after an aid station?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you have any patients that you would keep for a longer time, or did they all go on somewhere else?
Well, very few, maybe about 10%
Mhm.
that would stay for a little longer.
Now, were those ones that could get better and go back, or did you just have to stabilize them first?
Well, they had to be administered to more than they could handle if they were being shipped out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just kept them.
Okay. And then, when you sent them out, did they go in ambulances or trucks or?
They went ambulances and took them on trains.
Okay. Okay. And then, do you know where they would go after that? Were there bigger hospitals or?
Oh, they would go either further in, or they would go across to England.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And as we go into night, how long did you stay with your unit? Because you're there.
I was there until I wasn't back in the States too long, and I was just in the fall probably. Oh, yeah,
Okay. Well, where were you when the Germans surrendered?
in the States.
Okay. And why had you gone back to the States?
I got sick.
Okay. And when did you get sick?
I had what they call pleurisy with effusion, and it involved the diaphragm.
Mm-hmm.
And in the treatment, the doctor was putting Novocaine in between my ribs, and he slipped through and collapsed my right lung, and that was almost terminal.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I got my lung inflated enough, I came back. I was flown back to the States.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and when was that?
That would have been probably, well, I came back into the States and the trees were just beginning to leaf out, so it was spring.
Okay. All right. And then once you're healthy again, then you went back to work as a nurse in the Army, or?
No, I ended up at Walter Reed.
Okay.
And there, they did some more. They went in and made a little incision and wanted to stop the diaphragm from functioning. And they also came in contact with the nerve to my right arm, so I lost use of my right arm. It took quite a while. I still have problems with it.
Okay. Now, did you ever return to active duty, or
No,
you just,
no, I was discharged.
so you got
I
discharged?
had points to have gotten out before, but it wasn't an opportune time to do that.
Right. Yeah, well, they wanted to get you healthy first and
Right.
and let you out. All right. Now, when you think back to the time that you spent in England and France, are there kind of particular events or things that you remember about that you haven't mentioned yet?
Well, in England, they used to have programs, and we were, of course, invited. What bothered us is they always played God Save the King, but never Star Spangled Banner.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, well, that's kind of let down. But I don't think anything in particular that I especially enjoyed in England.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were in France, did you see much of the civilian population there?
I saw quite a little bit of them. Mhm.
And what impression did you have of them?
They were very, very happy to see us, and I felt sorry for them because, you know, what they were going through.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just kind of nice to have somebody that appreciated you.
Right. Now, did they do any work for you in your camp or any place?
No, not really.
Okay. And what impression did you have of the German POWs that you had?
Well, they were very young, a lot of them. They were the shock troopers. They were the dangerous ones. And we had a lot of them that were ill, that
Mhm.
had been wounded, and we were taking care of them. So we learned some German, you know, Haben Sie was and Sister, and
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of little things. But you never got too close to them because they didn't feel that was a very
Mm-hmm.
good idea.
Right. Now, did you have any that were assigned to you kind of long-term, just to do work for you, or did you just use them while they were there?
Well, they used mainly for bringing in and taking
Right.
wounded out.
But did some of them stay with you for a long time?
I think they did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were prisoners. They were at military police working
Mhm.
with them.
Right. Did most of the prisoners seem to be happy to be out of the war?
I think they were just disgusted to think they were prisoners.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of them you think might have been SS people or Hitler Youth or something like
Yeah,
that?
those SS troopers, you know, they weren't very nice.
No, they weren't.
No, they weren't nice.
But they probably weren't using SS people in your hospital, though.
No.
No, but they might. But some of the kids, if they were young, if they're 16, 17, if they were very young, they would have grown up in the Hitler Youth and all of that.
Well, the problem was, you know, they've been so indoctrinated by Hitler
Mm-hmm.
that they don't feel very secure in their presence.
Right. Okay. Now, when you went back to the States, did you go on a ship or did they fly you?
I was flown back in a hospital plane.
Okay. All right. Now, once you are discharged from the Army, then what did you do?
Well, I could not go to work. I couldn't do any nursing, so I decided to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to Michigan, to Spring Arbor, and it was a junior college then, and when I finished there, I had to go to Illinois to my senior college, and I got a bachelor's degree. And then I still couldn't go to work, and I thought, well, I'd like to further my education. So back to Michigan I came, into Michigan State. And I was there for 2 terms when my director of nurses somehow or other found me and wanted to know if I wouldn't come back to my home school to be an instructor.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, that's a golden opportunity. I can always, I'm only, about 27 years old. I can always get my education.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back there, and I was amazed she knew me as a student. Now, how did she have confidence enough in me to ask me to come and educate student nurses?
Now, was that all the way back to Bradford?
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah, that was a long time before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I enjoyed that, but then they changed the administration,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not too conducive to being a job that I kept wanting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided, I guess maybe it was time to come back to Michigan. And so I came to Blodgett and Butterworth Hospital to see about work.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed the directors of nurses in both hospitals, and then I liked Blodgett. And so I went back to Pennsylvania because I was in the middle of courses,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted me to come to Blodgett, but I told them I couldn't because I felt I should finish out the course with the students instead of leaving. So they told me as long as I felt that way about it, I was certainly worth waiting for.
Okay.
And so I came to Bulge to start an in-service education program for aides and orderlies.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was doing that, I went to nursing organizations in Grand Rapids and then to the state association in Lansing. And while I was down there, the executive director said, why don't you come down here and be an assistant executive director? Well, I thought that does sound different. And so I decided that I would do that. And when I left Bulge, Ms. Graff said, anytime you want a job, there'll always be one for you. You can come back. And that was not an enjoyable job because I said my exercise was pushing a pen on a piece of paper and a chair back and forth from the desk.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed my contact with patients and students. So I went back to Blodgett and I did general duty. I went in the spring, I did general duty during the summer. And in the fall, they needed a pediatric instructor. So they said, would you be the pediatric instructor? I said, well, that's different. I guess I'll try, And while I was doing that, I still wanted to further my education, so I enrolled at the U of M Extension Service in Grand Rapids. And I worked with students all day, and I went as a student myself at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my master's degree in '63. And when I did that, they said, we need a coordinator for college programs. We have students at Calvin and junior college, and we want somebody to coordinate the program. Would you do that? And I thought, well, here we go again. So I said, well, I guess so. And I did that. I visited the college classes with the students. And one day when I was down at junior college, they approached me and said, why don't you come down here and teach? And I said, nursing? No, thank you. I said, I'm sold on diploma programs. I'm staying where I am. No, we need an anatomy instructor. So off to junior college, I went to teach human anatomy. Oh, variety is the spice of life.
Certainly is. Learn new things all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And then did you stay with that then for a while, or did you keep finding
I
new
was
things?
there going on my 13th year, and I developed spinal stenosis, and I had to have surgery, and the surgery was quite extreme. The doctor said it was the worst that he had ever seen anyone have spinal stenosis. And he took out 8 pieces of bone, and they're only 10 there to start with,
Mm-hmm.
to release the pressure on the cord.
Wow.
And I wasn't able to go back after that. I went back because I told him I had to find out if I could do it, and
Mhm.
I contacted Social Security to talk to them about it, and they said, well, if you go back and try it, you can't make it, then we understand that we forgive that time that you
Mm-hmm.
were gone. So that's what I did. That was back, I had the back surgery in 1940, that was,
You're 19.
I didn't get the, see, I was out, I had the surgery on the 5th of January in 1980, so
Mhm.
I missed that first semester. But the second semester, that's when I went back and tried it. I told him when I went back, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I've gotta find out for myself. I
Mhm.
feel self-respect, I have to know, and that's what I found out, it didn't work.
Okay.
But
So-
you know, I'll have to say this, because I do this with anybody I talk about what I've just done.
Mm-hmm.
I said that I believe that the Lord opens and closes doors. And I felt that he opened a lot of doors for me. I didn't go looking for those jobs, they came
Mhm.
looking for me.
Yeah.
And if I'd have been looking, that would have been another story. I'd probably have been one place forever. But that was and people look at me and they say, you certainly had a wonderful life, and I did. I really
Mhm.
did. And I miss it.
For sure.
I had a hard time when 1980 rolled up and that was the end.
Mhm.
I just couldn't get myself acclimated to that kind of a life.
Now, were you still able to at least kind of get around and do things at that time?
Well, I got so I could, do things around the house,
Mm-hmm.
and, but, now that I'm here, I've been at Belgian Manor since, 2nd of October in, 2000, I'll get my years right now, 2007.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And had you been in your own house until then?
Yeah, I came to Belgian Manor not for myself, because I had a friend with Alzheimer's,
Okay.
and her family were not too helpful to her,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd known her for 56 years. And so she kept telling me there are empty rooms all over the place in Belgian Manor. Why didn't I come and take one of them?
Mm-hmm.
So I finally did after she'd been there 8 months. She passed away in August of 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right.
and then I made the mistake of falling,
Oh.
but I didn't break any. I'd fallen a dozen times before that, and I've never, so thankful I never broke any bones. But I don't know.
All right.
When I talked to Dr. Nye, I said, I'm a victim of circumstances. She said, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did, they took me off to the hospital and told me, and somebody kept telling me I'd broken bones in my back, and I said, no. But nobody ever talked to me or could have told them that if you knew what you're looking at in an x-ray, and there are 8 places there's no bone, that's the problem, and I didn't break anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you knew more than they did.
No,
All right.
that's for sure.
Okay. Now, when you look back at the time that you spent in the Army, what do you think you took out of that, or what did you learn from it?
I think I learned to appreciate life a lot more. I appreciate the freedom. When I got back to the United States, I could have gotten down and kissed the ground. I was so happy to really be back. And I remember getting on a ferry boat in New York, and it was a foggy night, and the old foghorns were sounding off, and there was a man sitting on this boat right next to me. And he looked at me and he said, Lieutenant, did you just come back from overseas? And I said, yes, I did. Oh, he said, that's the answer. And I thought it was air raids, You know, when I look at the GIs of today, coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and I see the hurt in their faces, I know what they're thinking. I know what they're feeling. And I feel for them, really.
Yeah.
War is nasty.
It is a nasty business. It always
Yeah.
has been. All right. Well, you've got a pretty good story here, so I'd just like to close by thanking you for taking time to share it today.
Well, I thank you for coming and letting me tell you, because my nephew's been telling me, he told me that a long time ago, that I should contact somebody that would do that. And you know, I have a complete uniform in the museum at Grand Rapids. I gave it to him, and the lady was happy because she got the blouse, skirt, the officer's cap, and the shirt, the tie. I had the whole, she said, you have a complete uniform. That's, I never saw one before like that. And I had a nice hard jacket, you know, and so at least I got a little established in Grand Rapids.
And now we have a story to go with it.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Okay.